Well, hello everyone. My name is Ajahn Wade. I'm here at Empty Cloud Monastery, and it's time for our Friday morning live stream. Here with Ayawata, who has been looking after the monastery as the resident monastic, while Bhante Sudaso and Ayasoma are in Italy. We received some good news by email recently. I'm sorry, I had to motion to someone off camera. Received some good news by email recently that they've purchased the land in Italy for the Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni monastery under the name Empty Cloud Italia now, and so it's quite a big piece of news after a lot of work on their part. To having found a place that they think will be very suitable for a monastery there. They've had high hopes and really looking forward to establishing a monastery there. And so it's a big moment in the history of Empty Cloud. So saying that makes me smile also because we're coming to a big moment in the history of Buddhism with the Sala Puja coming up on Sunday as well. And so, they sent out an announcement by email. Soma and Bhante Sudaso did that we'll be observing a Sala Puja on Sunday here at Empty Cloud. And in that same message that they sent out to the email newsletter group, they included this big news about purchasing the property in Italy. So we're here seeing someone typing in "yay" in the chat box, and sadhus, and celebrating the good news. So Ayawada put up the information about this live stream just about half an hour ago or so. So it looks like we've got it listed as a meditation in Dhamma with Ajahn Wade, and I don't know if we'll do a guided meditation, but may just do some Dhamma talk a little bit, and then move on to maybe do some guided meditation at the end. If anyone would like to do guided meditation, can do so, bringing up perhaps one of the live streams from previous weeks. On the 26th of June, we did a guided meditation Dhamma talk, guided meditation with some wisdom contemplation at the end. Then a week later, the 3rd of July, did a guided meditation and some uplifting stories, some uplifting Dhamma stories. And so I think the title of that one now is Uplifting Dhamma, is how it's listed on the Empty Cloud YouTube channel. Also on the same channel as I mentioned, June 26th. I think that one is called The Dance of Calm and Wisdom. It's the 26th of June. So if you'd like to do a guided meditation, those are there. Then last Friday, so that's probably the 5th, I guess. Is that true? Or whatever last Friday was. We did, it must be more like the 11th. Last Friday we did the loving kindness chanting and meditation. Loving kindness chanting is a methodology for practicing a guided meditation on loving kindness. And just a few words of Dhamma at the end. All right. So now thinking ahead to a Sala Puja, one of the 3 major holidays we observe in Theravada Buddhism. Some others are also observed, but the three big ones are the Magha Puja in February, which celebrates the spontaneous gathering of 1,250 arahants with the Buddha without a prior plan, and on which day he gave a talk that is preserved down to the present day as the Ovada Patimokkha, the exhortation on the entryway to liberation, which laid out basic principles of his religion. It being very early in the religion, he was laying out basic principles that he would later expand on. much more detail, from which we have the teaching coming down to the present day of the teaching of all Buddhas in a summary format. Not to do any evil, but to do that which is skillful and to purify the mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. A simple 4-line summary of the teachings of all Buddhas, stretching back through history and forward into the future as well. And then Wesak Puja, which falls on the full moon of May, according to the modern calendar. We had a celebration of that here at Empty Cloud with circumambulation of the Buddha image on the south lawn, and Dhamma talk as well. And that celebrates the birth, the enlightenment, and the passing into Nibbana of the Holy Lord Buddha, the perfectly self-enlightened one, the Buddha of our history, the Gautama Buddha. And so these three fantastic events in his life: the birth, when he came into his final birth as taking birth as a human being, coming down from the two-seat of heaven, having fulfilled his parami, ready to attain perfect self-awakening, and then he attained that enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, and then at the end of his career passed into Nibbana, all on, as it happened, on the full moon of Wesak, according to the ancient lunar calendar in India, which corresponds to the full moon of May for us. 3 events that happened on the same date. You could say the full moon of Wesak. And now, coming up, the historic event of the Buddha teaching his first set sermon, the Dhamma Chakkappawattana Sutta, in which he found the 5 ascetics who had abandoned him, thinking that he returned to luxury on his path to enlightenment, having gone through an arduous period of asceticism, that he ate a full meal, and they thought that he'd returned to luxury and that all hope was lost of him attaining enlightenment. So they left him, and he did go on to attain enlightenment, and then out of compassion, he went to teach them, and he taught them the Dhamma Chakkappawattana Sutta, as I said, which lays forth the middle way to enlightenment and the Four Noble Truths, in which that middle way is found. A teaching that they say that only Buddhas can give. Only the Buddhas awaken to the Four Noble Truths and can set this Dhamma wheel in motion with the Four Noble Truths. And so clearly a very special day for us in Buddhism, as it forms the basis for the Buddhist religion. And it's said that no living being anywhere in the universe can stop this religion before its natural time is up. And so we're very fortunate to have the Buddhist teachings coming down to us in the present day, because the Holy Lord Buddha gave us this teaching on the full moon of Asala, according to the ancient Indian lunar calendar, and which we'll be observing on Sunday. It corresponds to the full moon of July, and then directly afterwards we'll be entering I expect to be entering the rains residence here. It's according to tradition, we enter the rains residence the day after Asala Puja. It's enjoined by the Buddha in the code of conduct for monastics, the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, that they have to stay in one place for 3 months during the monsoon season. So this is a very important period of time for Buddhists around the world, when the monastics will be staying in one place. And typically the lay Buddhists also will do something to increase their practice of Buddhism in one way or another. So the monastics typically will intensify their meditation practice or their study, and lay people often will undertake some way of improving their practice also. And so it's been It's been sometimes described as a Buddhist Lent period. That'll be starting the day after the full moon. There is a second rains residence, or it's oftentimes referred to by its Pali name, Wasa. And that starts a month later. The Buddha gave us this opportunity. If there was some reason that a monastic could not enter the rains residence for the first Wasa, starting the day after Sala Puja, then he could do so. He or she could do so a month later. It's called the second Wasa. And Bhante Sudaso, as I understand it, intends to do that. He'll be arriving shortly after the first Wasa begins, and he'll be entering the second Wasa here at Empty Cloud. And so it looks like there'll be two of us bhikkhus here to stay in the rains residence on slightly different schedules. Now I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity, with it being a Sala Puja coming up soon, to talk a little bit about Asala Puja and the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. And so I'm bringing up now on the computer the Dhammacakkappavattana, or rather I should say I brought it up a few minutes ago, but I'm copying the link and see if I can post it in here for you. A link to Tanisaro Bhikkhu's translation of the Dhammacakka from Access to Insight, for anyone who'd like to take a look at it. I can't say that I'm going to do a close reading of it or anything like that, but I'll probably offer extemporaneous thoughts on the teaching and the Sala Puja itself and the story behind it and so on, in preparation for the big holiday coming up just in a couple of days on Sunday. So as I said, here at Empty Cloud Monastery, we'll be celebrating it. The final schedule isn't worked out with all the details, but the basic idea is that we'll be doing the traditional meal offering. Receiving the monastics will receive the meal at 11 a.m. And so anyone who would like to participate in making meal offerings, we'd like to recommend arriving a little bit before 10:30 or by 10:30 to present dishes and prepare dishes and this sort of thing. There probably will be a rice bindabat as well. This is typical on Sundays here, actually every Sunday. Lay people have the opportunity to put rice directly into the monks' bowls. I forgot to mention that also on Sundays is traditional here at Empty Cloud. Every Sunday morning we have an opportunity for people to come in and do volunteer work as an act of service for the monastery to make merit of doing service. And so it can arrive as early as 8, 9 o'clock is more typical, and do some volunteer work for an hour and a half before the meal proceedings start. After the meal proceedings, we'll after the rice bindabat, I should say, and receiving the food, there'll probably be a short talk, and the administration of precepts and a blessing chant, and we think we may chant the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta or an excerpt from it. And then perhaps a circumambulation of the Buddha image. As I said, the details are being worked out and so on. And then the regular afternoon program will continue starting at 1 o'clock with meditation and more Dhamma talk and so on like that. It may be that if we do a circumambulation, it will take place after 1 o'clock as well. And so there'll be some continuity between the morning Asala Puja celebration and the regular afternoon program, similar to how we did it on Wesak Puja here back in May. This is a wonderful opportunity. It says in the Dhammapada that whatever gifts and offerings one might make over the course of an entire year, the merit does not match the merit of worshiping one who is consummate. And this Sala Puja is an opportunity to worship. Puja, of course, from the ancient Pali, meaning to worship, and be worshiping the triple gem on that day, worshiping the Buddha who gave us the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and worshiping the Dhamma that's in there, just as the Buddha himself worshipped the Dhamma. And then we will be also worshiping the holy Sangha who has passed down these teachings from generation to generation, over 100 generations now to us. and embodied the teachings. So we have their excellent example to follow. And so worshiping the Triple Gem, we're worshiping the very highest by Buddhist standards. And so it's a great deal of merit for us to participate in this worship. Also, of course, an opportunity to grow in wisdom as we contemplate the teachings and we hear Dhamma talk on them and so on like this. It's an opportunity for us to grow in wisdom, develop our wisdom parami. And the development of parami in this way is of profound significance, profound value. It's said that at the end of hearing the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Venerable Kondanyo, one of the five ascetics who had supported the Buddha on his quest for enlightenment, attained to Sotapanna, that is stream entry in the doctrine of the Buddha, and thereby became the first noble disciple, and the Sangha was born. And so on that moment we had for the very first time the Triple Gem. And how was it that the Venerable Kondanyo, who was then to be known as Anya Kondanya, how is it that he attained enlightenment on hearing the teaching of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta? And it's a question that gets raised from time to time in Buddhist circles about how is it that we see in the suttas and the Tipitaka in general, see disciples of the Buddha attaining enlightenment as they listen to a talk. And how is it they were able to do this? It may take us so many arduous years of practice to attain enlightenment. How is it that they were able to attain Sotapanna or even Arahantship while listening to a Dhamma talk? And there are several possible reasons for this, but one is one that is commonly taught that I think really must be true, is that because they had developed so much parami over time, so much parami, that is their spiritual virtues, usually translated into English as the perfections, developing these perfections to such a level that when they heard a teaching from the Buddha, that they could have a breakthrough to the Dhamma. And in fact, it didn't necessarily have to be a teaching from the Buddha. They say that the Venerable Sariputta, it's enshrined in our scriptures in the basket of discipline, the code of discipline for the monastics, that when the Venerable Sariputta, when he was still seeking the path to the deathless, he saw the Venerable Asita on alms round, who was so inspired by his deportment that he asked him for a teaching. And the Venerable Asita, who himself was already an Arhat, said that the teachings of the Buddha were very profound. The Venerable Sariputta says, well, please just teach me just the gist of the teachings. And so the Venerable Atisa, I may have said his name incorrectly just a moment ago, I apologize. The Venerable Atisa, not Asita, Atisa, he gave him the teaching, all that is subject to arising is also subject to ceasing. And just on hearing this teaching, the eye of Dhamma in the Venerable Sariputta arose. And it was just like that, right there in the presence of the teacher on this one-line teaching. The eye of Dhamma arose within the Venerable Sariputta, and his course was set that he would attain enlightenment in that life. And so he had developed parami over a vast period of time, specifically to become a chief disciple of a rightly self-awakened one. The commentaries give us the backstory to his life, and they say that he and the Venerable Moggallana, to whom Sariputta would pass on this teaching, just shortly thereafter, and resulting in the Venerable Mahamoggallana also giving rise to the eye of Dhamma, that the two of them in a distant past life had the opportunity to worship a rightly self-awakened one, like the Buddha of our history, in the presence of that Sammasambuddha's chief disciples. And Venerable Sariputta and Mahamoggallana in this previous life were so inspired by these chief disciples, by their grace and deportment, that they made the aspiration that they would in the future also be chief disciples of a rightly self-awakened one. And so they developed parami over a great deal of time, so that not only could they see the Dhamma, but that they would actually become chief disciples, as they did become chief disciples of the Holy Lord Buddha Gautama of our history. Excuse me. And it's an interesting story about how they went forth. I think also they went forth from the home life in that life, trying to find the path to the deathless. The story we have from the commentaries is that they each had a large following of friends. As I recall, it was each one of them had a following of 500 friends who so admired Sariputta and Moggallana that they were their followers even in lay life. And they went to a long festival, a multi-day festival, and they were all watching a dramatic production, a play. And it arose in the minds of Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggallana while watching this play that everyone on the stage was bound to die. They were bound to pass away. And this is, I think we all can agree, this is quite a remarkable insight for someone to have. That while going to, sitting at a festival, surrounded by your friends, watching a play, it suddenly strikes you that everyone on stage is going to die. And with this insight into the fleeting nature of life and the certainty of death, both of them resolve to leave the home life and to go seek the deathless or immortality. And that's what caused them to wander and eventually find the Buddha and become his chief disciples. And this also would be accredited to their vast store of parami, having developed parami over a very long time, and most specifically, really their wisdom parami. That when seeing something, they see the important natural characteristics in it, and the cause-effect relationships at play, and so on like that. This would be called their wisdom. And so, seeing these living beings, these human beings, performing a play, they don't see it just as the story that's playing out, and they don't become dazzled by the costumes, and so on like this. All these transitory things on the surface, but instead they see deeply into the true fundamental nature of the situation in a way that's truly important and beneficial and skillful for them. And what was truly skillful was to see that actually, all of us living beings are subject to dying. And when you see things in this context and you have a great deal of wisdom like they do, then you seek a way out. And then they also had all of the parami that would support them in making the decision, a decision that would be difficult for so many people, to leave their friends and families, to renounce everything that they had, to go forth into homelessness to seek immortality. And no doubt they would have to draw upon their other parami, such as I mentioned, we was talking about wisdom parami at first, and no doubt they'd have to draw on their parami of perseverance, to persist and keep searching until they found that path to the deathless. They would have to, no doubt, use their perfection of endurance, living the homeless life, not necessarily having a shelter, not knowing where the next meal would come from. No doubt they had to endure cold, and they had to endure heat, and they had to endure hunger and thirst, until they were able to find this path to the deathless. And these are just some of the parami. And so if we circle back to Anya Kondanya, the Venerable Kondanya, who heard the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta and attained to Sotapanna right there, the eye of Dhamma arose. Typically, according to tradition, this is accredited to his development of parami in the past. And they say that the tradition tells us the story that he had made a resolution in a previous life to become the first person to, I'm not sure exactly how it's phrased, to see the Dhamma or to attain Sotapanna. I'm not sure exactly how it's phrased. But after developing parami for a long period of time in previous lives, his good karma came to fruition at that moment, that the Buddha sought him and his companions out, taught them the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and in fact he did have the requisite parami so that he could become a Sotapanna right there on the spot. And I find these stories very inspiring. It's It's I ordained the lineage of Ajahn Chah, a master in the lineage of Ajahn Mun, known in the West as the Thai forest tradition. And it's one of the teachings of the masters that if we have a spiritual aspiration and we put our hearts to it, and we don't give up, that we can achieve that spiritual aspiration. It may take a long time. It may be harder than we ever expected. We may sometimes despair, but as long as we don't give up, we will be able to succeed. I suspect that it's due to the power of the good karma of making a right effort. That we make the right effort to engender and increase skillful qualities, and to reduce and stop and prevent the arising of unskillful qualities within us. That this is such good karma, and it develops the perfections within us that eventually, sooner or later, as long as we keep trying, we will achieve our goal. A very inspiring message, I think, for all of us. Even when life looks bleak, that as long as we don't give up, or even if we give up temporarily, which is quite human and natural, I think. But if we pick it up again and we keep going, then we can reach our spiritual aspirations. And indeed, it's in those very times of hardship, not only in those times of hardship, but also in those times of hardship, when we keep going, we keep trying, that we develop even more parami. If we have to persevere, then we develop that very same perseverance parami that I mentioned before. If we have to exert a lot of energy, and so on like this, if we have to endure, then we develop our endurance parami, our patience, and our willingness to keep going. If we have to develop loving kindness to deal with people who are difficult to deal with, or to deal with the anger and frustration within us, to deal with anxiety and other unskillful mental states, and this develops our spiritual perfection of loving kindness. If even when it's difficult, we practice generosity, with faith in the power of karma that will bring good results for us, then this will develop our generosity parami. And if people want to take things from us, then we can even make a gift of them, and therefore enjoy the good karma, the merit of the good karma that will come to us, and also further develop our spiritual perfection of generosity. The very same spiritual perfection that, according to the tradition, according to the teachings about how the Buddha attained enlightenment, they say that there was this very same parami that the Buddha appealed to when he called the earth goddess to witness that he could attain enlightenment. And according to the legend passed down through the centuries about how the Buddha attained enlightenment, they say that Mara came to him with a great army as he sat there under the Bodhi tree with the firm resolve to attain enlightenment. And Mara said, he told him, you can't do it. You don't have enough parami. And the Holy Lord Buddha, still the Bodhisattva, of course, he summoned the earth goddess and asked her to bear witness that he had completed his generosity parami. And on the basis of this, the earth goddess swept away Mara and his army. And this indicates the importance that the tradition ascribes to the development of parami, and in this case, singled out the generosity parami. And I think we can see also that you have to be very strong to give, especially to make big sacrifices. And in doing so, it helps us to let go. And letting go, of course, is one way we can talk about the whole of the Buddhist path. Now, if we consider the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, one of the things that struck me in the early times of me studying Buddhism and becoming acquainted with Buddhism was how straightforward it seemed to be, and yet how profound. How commonsensical it seemed to be, and yet how wise. How cogent it was, and yet how well detailed and so thorough. And it gave me a great deal of faith in the Buddhist teachings. Studying these Four Noble Truths when I was still new to Buddhism. The Holy Lord Buddha began the teaching by telling the five ascetics that he had discovered the middle way that leads to enlightenment. He said there is the extreme of indulgence in sensual pleasures, which is not the way that will lead you to enlightenment. It's actually not the path out of suffering. He said there is another extreme, and that is the extreme of self-torment, which also will not lead you out of suffering. It's an extreme that will not lead you to enlightenment. This extreme is sometimes confused. It's with the practices of asceticism within the field of the Buddhist teachings. The Buddha, in this case, is talking about self-torment that does not help us to reduce our defilements, to overcome our defilements. He says that this is an extreme that is unprofitable and doesn't lead to enlightenment. But he did teach of ascetic practices, practices that are translated into English from the Pali Dhutanga as ascetic, which are very profitable, such as the practice of not lying down, to remain in a sitting or a standing or a walking position. This is usually implemented, for example, to practice meditation all night, to sit in meditation, practice walking meditations all through the night instead of sleeping. A practice that is common in many meditation traditions for practitioners to undertake even just one night at a time, perhaps one night a week, to spend more time developing their practice. So this is called in English an ascetic practice, and this is something that the Buddha recommended in his teachings. We have a teaching in the suttas about having a glorious night. And it's a night where you spend the night in meditation, discerning the rise and fall of phenomena, seeing right there impermanence. Another ascetic practice, eating one meal a day, is something that the Buddha recommended to help us overcome our defilements. Also living in the forest, or living at the foot of a tree, or living even out in the open without any cover except your own, for a monastic, his own robes, his or her own robes. And there are others. There's a standard list of 13. And so there are some ascetic practices, some self-denying practices, which are specifically taught to help us overcome our defilements. And so therefore they form part of the path, a possible part of the path to attaining enlightenment. The Buddha found through his own striving that doing things like fasting for very long periods of time without eating at all, as it turned out for him, it wasn't profitable. It weakened his body, and he found in the end that he needed to eat some food in order to continue his quest for enlightenment. It's just one example of a practice of self-torment that he later condemned as being unprofitable when he talked about this extreme of self-torment. But he told his five ascetics that he had found the middle way that led between these two extremes, as it says, and leads to enlightenment and the overcoming of suffering, getting out of the round of rebirths. And then he went on to describe to them the Four Noble Truths. Many of you are probably familiar with them, at least in general. Some of you may be new to them, and so I'll talk about them from a general point of view, but also in some degree of detail as well. The Buddha told his five ascetics that the first noble truth is that there is suffering. And he talked about various aspects of suffering in order to define it for them and tell them, what it was he meant. And he said, for example, old age is suffering, disease is suffering, and death is suffering. Not attaining one's wishes is suffering. Separation from what is loved is suffering. And association with what we dislike is also suffering. And in fact, he went on to say that the 5 aggregates associated with clinging are suffering. And the 5 aggregates, when he refers to these, he means the body and many aspects of our mental experience. It's a way of analyzing living beings into their constituent parts, and that was common in ancient India at this time. So, for example, if we take up the first one, the body, as I mentioned, and matter in general, because actually it wasn't, I should point out, it wasn't it's limited to the body, but it was matter and energy in general. So our bodies and the matter outside of us, the physical world we have to interact with, is quite burdensome, and it impinges upon us, and it's difficult, and it can be painful, as in the cases that he specifically mentioned of old age, disease, and death, which are natural for a human body and necessary. If you have a body, if you're born into a body, then you must experience disease and death. And unless you die young, then you must experience aging, old age as well. But then also we must experience, heat and cold. For example, we experience the bites of mosquitoes and flies and ants, and perhaps much larger creatures, snakes and so on like this. And the Buddha later was asked, what is this, what is rupa, as it says in Pali? Rupa, which we usually translate into English as form, which really is matter and energy. And he says, well, it's called rupa because rupati, and rupati meaning that it decays or wastes away, something like this. Or even I've seen one translation gets chewed up over time. And linguists have said actually there isn't really a connection between the words rupa and rupati, but the Buddha was taking advantage of this opportunity to point out an important aspect of rupa, that is matter and energy, which is that it decays, it gets chewed up, and it's afflicted. And while you can say many things about matter and energy, this is an important aspect to pay attention to if you ever want to overcome suffering. Ajahn Chah once gave a teaching. He was teaching a woman who had come to ask him some questions and this kind of thing, and she mentioned that she'd had a stomach ache. I think it was a stomach ache just recently, and Ajahn Chah, he seized on the opportunity to teach her about the Rupa Khandha. He says, "Oh, you had a stomach ache?" And she says, "Yes." And he says, "Well, I'm sorry to hear that." He says, "I wonder, let me ask you this, have you ever had a headache?" And she says, "Oh, yes, Reverend Father, I have had a headache before." And Ajahn Chah, he says to her, "Let me ask you this, have you ever had a backache?" And she says, "Well, yes, Reverend Father, I have had a backache before." And then he says, "Oh, I see. And have you ever had a tail ache?" And she says, "No, Reverend Father, I've never had a tail ache." And he says, "You've never had a tail ache?" And she says, "No, I've never had a tail ache, Reverend Father." She was quite confused, and he says to her, "Why is it you've never had a tail ache?" And she says, "Well, Reverend Father, I don't have a tail." And Ajahn Chah says, "Exactly." And this is a teaching about how we identify so much with our bodies, and we're so attached to our bodies, and of course, on the other side of it, we fear anything happening to our bodies, and we suffer over it when anything does, such as illness, having an ache or a pain. And Ajahn Chah was pointing out to her, this is the very nature that if you have a body, that sometimes it will be uncomfortable, it'll be painful, or you'll be sick. And the path to immortality, to getting out of suffering, to getting out of the cycle of birth and death is about letting go of bodies, not getting attached to bodies and making more bodies and going around and around in samsara, but rather going beyond bodies altogether. And so the Buddha, talking in this First Noble Truth about there is suffering, says old age, disease, and death, association with what is disliked and not being associated with what we love, not attaining our wishes, and association with the five aggregates. The five aggregates are suffering. I'm talking in some detail there about the body. And perhaps as a prelude to talking about the second noble truth, can point out that one of the other khandas, that's I use the word khanda, and for those of you who aren't aware, it simply means a group. In English, it simply means a group, often translated as aggregate. It actually means like a group, just a group. And so we talk about rupa, it's the group of all things that fit under the category of matter and energy. Another one is mental factors, or mental qualities. Mental formations is how it's usually translated. And this includes a wide array of mental experiences, like such as sadness and happiness, and the kilesas are in there. That is the defilements of mind, the broad category of greed, and the broad category of aversion. Delusion also is one as well as his mindfulness, and so on like this. Some other aspects of our mental experience, and so the Buddha, he's pointing out that that actually these mental factors are difficult to bear, and that they're suffering also. Just another one of the aggregates, of the five aggregates. And I mentioned this as a prelude to the second noble truth, because in the second noble truth, the Holy Lord Buddha, he pointed out the cause of suffering. He said the cause of suffering is tanha. And tanha is an ancient Pali word that literally means thirst. And so he's using a term in metaphor. It means thirst. And he said, and what thirst for what? He said thirst for sensual pleasures, for becoming, and for non-becoming. These are the three forms of tanha, or thirst, that are the cause of suffering. Usually this is termed tanha. The thirst is translated into English as craving. And so sensual pleasure is the first kind of tanha that is the cause of suffering. It encompasses all those pleasures dependent on sense objects that we cognize via the six sense doors. Six sense doors being our eyes and our ears, our nose and our tongue, for flavors, and then the physical body for tactile sensations, the touches of things, the physical sensations of things. And then the sixth sense door being our internal sense, the sense door of the mind, which senses ideas, thoughts, memories, and emotions, so on like this, the whole mental and emotional world. And so whatever pleasures we experience at those sense doors, such as beautiful sights or beautiful sounds or delicious tastes, for example, it could be ideas at the mind, for example, ideas that we find very interesting, even jokes we find funny. These are all sensual pleasures, all of these kinds of things at the six sense doors. He says it's the thirst for sensual pleasures. This is one form of thirst that is the cause of suffering. The second, the thirst for becoming. Becoming, the definition for becoming we find in the commentaries that grew up later, explaining what is this becoming, and it is the actions we take and their consequences. The thirst for taking action and experiencing the consequences is the second form of thirst, also a cause of suffering. So when we want to play a game and have fun, when we want to argue a case in court, say you're a lawyer and you want to argue a case in court and experience the success of arguing this case, winning for your side. When you want to rearrange the contents of your refrigerator, you feel a thirst to rearrange the contents of the refrigerator and organize it. Thinking then that with the assumption, however prominent or latent it is, that then you'll be satisfied with things. Life will be better. Sometimes we experience this when we're trying to meditate. We feel an urge to rearrange the contents of the refrigerator. All these kinds of things are becoming, taking actions and experiencing the consequences. And the thirst for this is the second cause of suffering, say, all under the heading of the single heading of thirst. And then the third is the thirst for non-becoming, to not take action and not experience the consequences. All the way from the desire to be annihilated, to not experience life anymore, down to the smaller kind of the laziness. Let me just lay here and not do anything. I just wish I could just lay here and not do anything. Perhaps couch potato-ism, when you're not even interested in watching the TV, but the TV is playing, you just don't want to do anything. The thirst for non-becoming. And so the Buddha said that these three forms of thirst are the cause of suffering that we talked about, that the Buddha taught about in the first noble truth. And then he said the third noble truth is the truth of the cessation of suffering. And he said that it is the abandoning of this very same thirst. It's this very same tanha. And he said that when we abandon this tanha, then we experience nibbana, variously translated as some translated as extinguishing, and some others translated as unbinding or freedom, because the word nibbana comes to us in Pali from the ancient scriptures, and it was another metaphorical use of the word. So the Buddha used the word tanha, or thirst, metaphorically. And in this case, he uses the term nibbana metaphorically. And as I understand it, in ancient India, it was a word that had currency already. It wasn't the Buddha didn't invent it, and he wasn't the first to use it, although he was the one who found the way to attain it and who understood it better than anyone at that point, because he had realized it. And so it's used interchangeably sometimes with the term moksha or liberation, or vimutti, another word for freedom. And so some would say that this word nibbana should be translated as unbinding, indicating the freedom in it. When I mentioned that it was used in metaphors, because it relates to when a fire goes out. So imagine that we have a fire burning. And when we say in modern English, when the fire dies out, when it goes out, or when it's put out, we say the fire goes out. And in ancient India, they'd use this term nibbana for the condition when a fire's gone out. And so, apparently in ancient India, some argue that they had a different understanding of how fire works because of its relationship to the fire god Agni. And so, in modern times, when we think of a fire going out, we think of it being dead or just simply being absent or annihilated. But in ancient India, it seems that they had a different understanding of how fire works, and the Buddha talks about this a little bit in the suttas about nibbana, and there's a sutta where he talks about Vajragota about fire, and talks about the subjects also with Vajragota about what is the condition of an arhat or Tathagata when he attains enlightenment, and he says actually it's very profound and deep, and indicating you can't really put it into words what it's like when someone goes beyond all suffering and they attain nibbana, when they go to nibbana after death. But in describing it in the suttas, he talks about it in terms of liberation and the complete absence of suffering, and in fact, the very greatest pleasure. He says that this peace is the greatest pleasure you can possibly experience. So in talking, he oftentimes contrasts it with sensual pleasures and the spiritual path in general with sensual pleasures. That sensual pleasures, in fact, are suffering, and they bind us to suffering, as we talked about in the second noble truth, and this thirst for sensual pleasures. But the spiritual pleasures are much more delicious, And in fact, they lead us all the way to Nibbana, which is the greatest pleasure of all. And so in this third noble truth, where the Buddha is talking about the cessation of suffering, he told his disciples about Nibbana for the very first time as the goal of the ultimate highest goal of the Buddhist path. And so the masters all the way through history, while they've passed on the Buddhist teachings about how to be happier in this life and how to be happier in the round of rebirths by getting better rebirths, they've also pointed out that actually the very highest is to attain Nibbana, go beyond rebirth altogether. And this is what the Buddha laid forth in the third noble truth. And then in the fourth noble truth, the Buddha taught this middle way that he spoke of at the very beginning of the teaching. He said that there is this noble truth of the path of practice to the cessation of suffering. And he said it is this very same middle way, the middle way that he said was between the extremes of indulgence in sensual pleasures and in self mortification. And he laid it out as the Noble Eightfold Path. One of the highest dhammas he teaches in the suttas, and it gathers up many other teachings that he gives that he gave to elucidate different aspects of the path. And it's quite he lays it out in a stepwise fashion, but actually in talking about it later on, he says it can be developed in many different ways, and it can be quite complex, and so it's worthy of a great deal of study. And let's see if I can go through the 8 steps here on the spot. And so it begins with right view, and then it goes on to right thought, sometimes translated to something like right inclination, so on like that. And then we have right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And these eight factors of the Noble Eightfold Path can be kind of summarized or classified under 3 headings. The aggregate of sila, which could be translated as self-control, oftentimes translated also as morality, and encompassing the factors of the path of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And the second category of samadhi, referring to, which specifically means concentration, but also it could also be understood a little bit more generally, I think, in the context of the Noble Eightfold Path and the multiple factors of the Noble Eightfold Path that fall under it, as meditation, a little bit more generally. This would be right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Those other 3 factors. And then the third category of the Noble Eightfold Path would be be wisdom, panya from the Pali, meaning wisdom, which would include the first 2 factors of the path, right view and right intention. And so this has been handed down to us throughout history as a summary of the pathway to enlightenment, the training in sila, samadhi, and panya, or morality, concentration, and wisdom. Oftentimes the Buddha refers to these 3 when talking to his bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and encouraging them to be devoted to the path of sila, samadhi, and panya. Cultivate the higher sila, the higher morality. Cultivate the higher mind, referring to this the samadhi, or cultivating the mind in this way, and the higher wisdom, the adhipanya. And so this is another way of referring to the Noble Eightfold Path. Can make it easier for us to remember kind of the main thrust of each one of them. To keep our precepts and to practice meditation and try to develop in wisdom. All right. Well, I've been talking for about 55 minutes now, and went over the 4 Noble Truths in summary with a little bit of detail, and talked about the backstory to some extent, and talked about the holiday observance that will be coming up on Sunday. And I wanted to see if we have any questions. I kind of scrolling back through the chat here before we wrap up in a few minutes, see if there are any questions. And I know that the talk has moved about a bit. Giving the talk extemporaneously is my habit and how we typically do things in the lineage of Ajahn Mun. And there's an old saying that we're called the wandering tradition in the lineage of Ajahn Mun. And part of the reason is that our talks wander a little bit. And so I hope it wasn't too difficult to follow. I hope you're able to absorb what I was saying as I went through. And it looks like we do have a question here from Charlie, who is staying at the monastery and doing a great job of doing service here and practicing and studying. What can I say?
I was just saying that I was just following your talk.
I'm sorry?
I was following the talk.
Oh, I see. Okay. Good. Okay. So he didn't have a question, but I was saying, I hope everyone could follow my talk, and he was saying he was able to. So that's gratifying to hear. All right. I don't see any questions coming in. And so perhaps this is a good time to wrap up then. I'll mention again that we have the Asala Puja service coming up on Sunday. And as I said, volunteer opportunities in the morning, starting as early as 8 a.m. And although I think most people usually come at 9 or a little bit after 9. And then the meal proceedings start at 11. If you'd like to offer some food, please come. I see we do have a question coming in, so after I finish talking about the Asala Puja schedule, I'll try to take one or two of these questions. So if you'd like to offer some food, please try to bring it by 10:30. And then, as I said, for the meal proceedings, we'll have some kind of a combination of giving precepts and a meal blessing, and perhaps maybe a short talk. And then after the meal and the meal cleanup, probably there'll be chanting and perhaps a circumambulation of the Buddha image on the south lawn. And then continue on with the regular program that it goes up till 4 o'clock, expecting it to consist of meditation and more Dhamma talk. All right. And now we have a question from Krypton Air. The question being, thank you for the Dhamma lesson. Can I get advice on whether food delivery is considered right livelihood? And that's a great, very pertinent question. And it depends on what you're delivering, what the food is. One of the forms of wrong livelihood for a layperson is trade in animals. One way this often is commonly understood is it would be trading in meat also. And so if you're delivering food that's vegetarian, then it should be okay. It would fit under right livelihood. All right. Thanks for the question, Krypton. Then Sood has a question. I heard other talks about how to use Buddho to kind of let go of this papancha that makes one confused and identify with the body, and etc. Do you have any thoughts about this? Okay, yes. So Buddho is a common meditation word in Thai Buddhism. The repetition of Buddho. If we talk about using Buddho alone, it would be a very quick repetition of Buddho typically. And one can either focus on an aspect of Buddho that is meaningful to one. Buddho perhaps as the one who knows or is knowing. To help the mind grow calm and to focus the mind on this meditation word, to gather the mind together into samadhi. Another way of using Buddho is simply as a word to repeat to drive thoughts out of the mind, to make the mind clear, as well as again to help the mind to focus and to develop samadhi. And so this can, in terms of letting go of papancha, this papancha kind of, in terms of other thoughts in the mind, is so I just mentioned that. But in terms of papancha making one confused and identifying with the body, you can temporarily go beyond kind of consciously being infatuated with the body and thinking about the body through using a meditation word like Buddho, but to uproot the identification with the body. In this confused perception, you would have to use the application of wisdom as well, which I think you probably know, Sud, that the meditation and the calming techniques can help us to temporarily suppress the hindrances and to drive out thoughts of things like this. But the actual attachment itself, kind of below the surface, below our conscious thinking and so on, has to be uprooted using wisdom, using vipassana, going through the insight knowledges and getting path and fruit. Okay, thank you for the question. Then we have maybe this will probably be the last question because of the time. A question from VL Hari Naidu. I think that the psychological activity or mental activity is very close to the activities taking place in the subatomic world. What is your opinion, Banteji? Okay. Click on this one, bring it up here, and people can see. There we go. I think that the psychological activity or mental activity is very close to the activities taking place in the subatomic world. What is your opinion, Banteji? Okay, so, well, I have to say, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with activities taking place in the subatomic world. Perhaps you're discussing things taught by or understood by quantum physicists or something like this, and I'm not very familiar with that at all. So I have to pass on that question. And when we talk about the psychological activity and mental activity within the scope of Buddhism, we might reference, for example, these Four Noble Truths and how the suffering that we experience in life, it comes from our own psychological and mental activity, how we look at things, how we respond to them internally. This can become quite evident as we meditate and learn more about our emotional responses to things. For example, it also, according to the Four Noble Truths, relates to our physical suffering as well, because it's the craving, says tanha, within us that causes us to be reborn again, thereby taking a physical body again and having all the physical suffering as well. Something that some of us might have to take on faith, but if we meditate, we can see the relationship between emotional suffering and how it's caused by our own mental and psychological processes within us. All right. Well, thanks for the questions, and sorry I couldn't answer all of them. And I'd like to anumotana you're listening to the Dhamma and your practice. And I hope you'll come out on Sunday if possible, or go to a house of worship near you, a monastery, for example, near you, perhaps a meditation center, see if they have a Sala Puja event. And this evening we'll have monk chat starting at 7:30 and here on the live stream. And then tomorrow evening here at the monastery, we'll have a Dhamma session starting at 6 p.m. to 7:30. With Bhante Sumita leading it with some meditation and Dhamma talk before we get into the Sunday Sala Puja. All right, take care, everyone. Call this the end of the session, and may you all be well.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu,
Goodbye, everyone.